Well, I went to work for Michigan Farmer in May of 1965, and the person that hired me to work there was the managing editor of Michigan Farmer, Dayton Matlick, and he was a believer in AAEA, a member of it, and he made sure that his staff members all got to be members. So I'm not sure whether I joined that year right out or whether 1966 would have been my first year as a member. I remember the first years AAEA met each December in the Conrad Hilton Hotel in Chicago, Illinois, and our offices were in East Lansing, Michigan. So Dayton and I would drive down, and we'd spend a couple of days there at that AAEA meeting. And at first I wasn't terribly interested in it. A bunch of old guys, the old generation of editors, Carol Streeter from Farm Journal and Del Dieterling from Progressive Farmer, and Ralph Foster from Kansas Farmer, Norm Reber from Pennsylvania Farmer, Earl McMunn and Del Groves from Ohio Farmer, guys of the generation before me. Now, while I had grown up on a farm and had a degree in journalism, when it came to knowledge about farming, I was green as grass. And so AAEA really introduced me to this national agriculture for the first time. I met people who were editors of magazines all over the country, and some of them nationwide. So after attending for maybe 4 years or such matter, 5 years, some of the younger editors who were coming in at that time, and me, we kind of were young Turks, I guess you might say. Larry Harper at Missouri Ruralist, and Hank Ernst at Kansas Farmer, and Andy Stevens down at Ohio Farmer. We started to want to see a little bit more out of AAEA than what we were getting. Shortly after that, like about a year or so later, we started agitating for more educational programming, more stuff about writing and photography and editing. And one of the first things that AAEA sponsored that I got involved with was their photo school at University of Missouri. I went to the first photo school in 1972 in Columbia, Missouri. Spent a week down there learning how to shoot a camera, available light, and never using flash, and never posing a picture, and all the good journalistic qualities that nobody seems to follow anymore. But they had quite an impact on me. I went down there with a brand new 35mm Spotmatic Pentax SLR, and when I'd come to the Michigan Farmer, they had handed me a Crown Graphic, shoots 4x5 film, taught me how to load 4x5 inch sheets of black and white film into these film holders and shoot these pictures, which must have terrified the farmers when you aimed it at them. Certainly we never got any candid pictures. So I really needed photo school. I didn't have any photojournalism when I was in college at all. So the communications clinic really started to boom about that time. And that was an every year thing. We would go to the AAEA meeting, and there would be a communications clinic meeting. And we wanted contests. We wanted to compete. We wanted to show how good we were. And I don't know how I got to be, whether it was lucky or a little bit of skill maybe, but mostly luck. I won the first AAEA photo cover of the year. I shot a picture. It was on the cover of the December issue of 1973 Michigan Farmer. And the next year I entered that contest, and it was the Farm Magazine cover of the year for AAEA. Well, that same roll of film, I had a picture of some livestock in the snow, and put that on the January 1974 cover, and that won Farm Magazine cover of the year in 1975. And everybody was curious at that time of whether I had run out of pictures from that film, that roll of film. And I had, of course. But that was pretty nice. I won those. And over the years after that, I've won a few category covers, but pictures, but never the top in the Farm Magazine cover of the year. In 1975, I won the AAEA Writer of the Year contest, and the prize for that was a 2-week all-expense paid trip to Switzerland. And since it was sponsored by Ciba Geigy, the chemical company, I learned a lot about chemicals manufacturing and herbicides and all that while I was there. But these contests were important to me. It allowed me to kind of spotlight the work that I was doing. This last year, in March, I received the Distinguished Service Award from Michigan State University. And I was nominated for that award by Dr. John Bukovac, the fellow that I had worked for in college, and the one that I learned about horticultural research from. And I felt like he said, well, you've done pretty well. He nominated me for that award. Then, after, perhaps about 1977 or such a matter, I started to think that maybe I should be more involved on the giving side in AAEA. I was named to their membership committee, which was pretty easy work. You just reviewed the applicants for, make sure that they were eligible to join. And I served on that for 3 or 4 years. I became a member of the Communications Clinic Committee, and that was very, very nice work. Enjoyed that, coming up with programs for our communications clinic each year. I worked with guys like Rich Fee and Gene Johnston, and we came up with some pretty darn clever programming for AAEA. One year I remember we brought in a designer. His name was Jan White. He was a magazine designer. He designs Architectural Digest, and he'd written a book called Editing by Design, and we brought him in as a speaker. And I remember the standing ovation that he got after that. It was something that most farm magazine editors hadn't even really thought of, and that is of merging layout and design with the concept of the story itself. Most of our layouts up until that point were pretty dreary things. There was not much attention paid to presentation. AAEA was quite influential in getting us politically connected in Washington. And we went to Washington several times and met some interesting people. I had my picture taken with President Richard Nixon in 1972. And in 1980, we went to Washington, again with AAEA, and went to the Russian embassy. We were invited there. And as you recall, in 1979, Russia had invaded Afghanistan. And in response, the United States had boycotted the Olympic Games in Moscow in 1980. So in the fall of 1980, we're invited to the Russian embassy. And what did they choose to do? Show us film of the Summer Olympics. And it went on for hours. I'm not kidding you. They changed reels several times. They had this old projector, and it was really something. It was dreary. Everybody was suffering through it. The only thing that was really good was that it was my first experience with Stolichnaya. The Russians know how to make really good vodka. They also know how to make really bad suits. I swear that these guys, we saw one guy was changing the film, and he was a burly, short guy, and the guy that was with him was tall and slender, and I'm sure that they had on the suit that was made by the same size and cut. They both of them. They looked, they made better vodka than they made suits, I must say. After the Olympic film, they had this press conference in which we were going to they talked about the success of their latest five-year plan. And we're all listening to these boring statistics. And then when all over, were there any questions? And everybody sort of sat there, and I said, what about Afghanistan? And apparently that question was considered quite rude by everybody, but it was on everybody's mind. But I did ask it, and I don't remember what the answer was, but I remember the question because it was really so appropriate, and I felt really proud that I asked it. When I joined the staff of Michigan Farmer, there was a feeling that, I think by the editor, Dayton Matlick, that farm magazine journalism was boring, that they didn't really do anything very interesting, and that there were a lot better stories that could be written. I came out of journalism school thinking that our job was to be investigative reporters and to really get into things. And generally speaking, in trade publications, that is not what is done. And I would say still today, it's not what is done. I did quite a bit of it and caused quite a bit of consternation from some of the stories that I managed to write over the years. One of them had to do with the poisoning of Michigan with PBB. Well, to give you a little background, in 1972, Farm Bureau Services, which was an affiliate of Michigan Farm Bureau and a company that sold feed to livestock farmers, accidentally mixed a chemical called polybrominated biphenyl into cattle feed. And this occurred apparently in the spring of 1972. Nobody discovered it until the fall. By that time, it had contaminated the feed mills across Michigan and the feed and the cattle, chickens, hogs, cattle, livestock of all kinds, dairy, and people were eating this stuff and didn't know anything about it, and this was cause for quite some panic. And while we were trying to figure out how this happened and all the Farm Bureau Services was trying to negotiate with their insurance company a settlement of this whole thing, and they were not being very open or talkative about it. And I managed to find some source material that explained exactly what had happened. And I was kind of it struck me as odd. Here everybody was wondering what had happened, and the lawyers and everybody already knew what had happened. They did, but the public didn't know what had happened. And I found the material that explained what had happened and published that, for which I won an award that was given to me by the Detroit Press Club Foundation, by Ben Bradley himself. The Washington Post handed me the award. The guy who was the boss of Woodward and Bernstein congratulated me and said, "Here, you won this award," and I felt very, very proud of it. The story, of course, the way we did it, I'm not sure we did it absolutely properly. Farm Bureau Services was our largest advertiser, and of course we lost that, and caused some really hard feelings. In 1982, AAEA had its summer meeting in Michigan, and I was chairman of the committee that hosted that in Traverse City, Michigan. And I got together with Donna Wilbur at Michigan Farm Bureau, who was really a fine journalist and information person there. And we put on a program that explained to the audience, the AAEA audience, what had happened and what we had done and how the reporting had taken place. And so it was kind of an amicable ending to the story, but those were the kinds of stories that we were writing. I had, that's just one example of the kind of stories where I would take the reader's point of view, or not the point of view, the reader's part in it. What did the reader need to know or deserve to know here? The 1980s were not very good years for farm magazines. They're pretty horrible for farmers, for farm magazines too, and for big equipment companies like International Harvester became that little IH at the end of the name case in those years. Big company, and suddenly really lost everything and was sold. Our magazine also was suffering somewhat and floundering around a bit, trying to make enough money to stay profitable. And in 1991, our company was sold to Farm Progress. And it really had nothing to do with the economics of our magazine. It had to do with the economics of the company that owned us at the time, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, the book publishing company. They managed to really mess things up and wound up having to sell us, and we got bought by Farm Progress. And Farm Progress was a different kind of an outfit. They did not really approve of the kind of reporting that the Harvest Publishing Company guys were doing. They had the big farm states, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and their magazines were pretty much as business-to-business kind of publications are today, which is to say they're not very controversial. They don't do anything in the way of investigative reporting. And I'd have to say that that's true in general. After losing my job at Michigan Farmer in 1991, I became a freelance writer for about 12, 13 years. And when you're a freelancer, you don't worry about investigative reporting. You're trying to do articles that people will buy and print and publish so you can make a check, So you don't go out as a freelancer and say you're an investigative reporter. I was about ready to retire in 2004. I was 62 years old. I was eligible for early Social Security. And I thought with a little bit of freelance work and Social Security, I'd make enough money, I'd be all right. So about 3 months after I retired, or semi-retired, took Social Security, I got a job working for Fruit Growers News, Great American Publishing over in Sparta, Michigan. And I became a writer for Fruit Grower News, Vegetable Grower News, Fresh Cut, and Spudman. And I spent 5 years there. I became managing editor of Fruit Grower News and really, really, really enjoyed writing about fruit. And we don't investigate things so much, but we write in depth. There's a lot of articles are scientifically correct and excellent reporting, I think. After 5 years there, I was getting a little antsy about some things, mainly because we were having these kind of arguments over what we were going to do on the internet and what we were going to do in print. And I was pretty dyed-in-the-wool print guy, you got to admit. I mean, I don't know much. I'm not going to shoot videos, and I'm not going to learn this stuff at my age. 72 years old, I don't want to learn how to shoot videos, even though I think videos are fine. I'll watch them, on YouTube. So anyway, I was 67 now and eligible for Social Security, and I could make as much money as I could. And so I decided I was going to retire again. And I took Social Security, and I was eligible, of course, for Medicare at the time, so my health insurance needs would be taken care of if I retired. So I called up Geraldine Warner, who was the editor of Good Fruit Grower, and said, how much material would you buy from me if I were a freelancer? I write about fruit on the eastern side of the continent for you. You're a magazine out in Washington State. And she said, well, we were thinking about hiring somebody over your way. And I said, really? Well, 2 months later, I was on the staff. And I've been there for 5.5 years now. And it's really the best job I've ever had. Really enjoy writing about fruit production. It's a good job. And I think that I will continue to work as long as I'm healthy and the work is good. We went through a period in the 70s, the Woodward and Bernstein era, where farm magazines were trying to be like good journalists and really go out there and sock it to them, and that is gone. Nobody socks it to anybody anymore. And you watch television, you'll see guys like Matt Lauer in the morning lobbing these softballs to political people, and they whack it back, and there's nobody asks any hard questions anymore. And there's just really not much in the way of investigative reporting. And it's getting worse because the newspapers are going out of business, or everybody's trying to figure out how they can stay viable. The internet has all these opinions on it, and no editors, all writers, no editors. So you have no way of sorting things out and figuring out what's true and what's false and people, television, like right now you got Dr. Oz on there spreading horse crap, It's just like, how do we do this, So anyway, I'm not terribly optimistic in some ways. If there's an upside to losing your day job, it's got to be that your time is suddenly yours to structure any way you want to or can. And a freelancer has enormous flexibility in structuring time. So I could do just about anything that I wanted to do. And one of the first things that I did was, in 1991, I'd become a soccer nut a few years earlier. And in 1991, I got a license to referee high school and FIFA soccer games. I just finished my 24th year of doing that. I did 3 varsity games this spring. I'm getting kind of old to be chasing high school kids. I think this will be my last season, but I spent 24 years doing it. And I would do as many as 100 games a year, and I really enjoyed that. I've not exactly the tallest person in the world, but I played volleyball for 20 years, loved it. Played softball a lot, doing leagues and things like that. I've been a gardener ever since I was a kid. I learned gardening when I was a kid. Every place I've ever lived, even the city, wherever it was, first thing I did was took a spade and went out and dug up a part of the yard and started a garden. Now I have a garden that's a half an acre, a little bit more than that. When I lived on a farm over by DeWitt, I had 30 acres by DeWitt, and I had a small flock of sheep, about 50 ewes. Then I moved over here, and I didn't have any sheep for a while, and then I got back into sheep. I started a little partnership with my brother, and we had sheep for about a year. And so now I live here now, and I've got 3 ewes and a ram, and my goal is to get a 300% lamb crop. That would be triplets from each of the 3 every year, which would be good. I've only done it once, and one of those died, so it was 267%. But I shear my own sheep, which is getting harder every year. But I like them. They're a small animal. They're easy to deal with. And they keep me disciplined. I have chores to do. I got to go out there every day and make sure they got feed and water. No matter how cold it is, no matter how lousy it is, it's a routine. And I think that people need a routine in life. I think hoeing the garden and doing this sort of thing, I do have a small tractor. I've got a rototiller, but I also have a wheel hoe and a hoe, and I use those a lot. I enjoy doing that. I've been growing fruit trees here for the last about 6 or 7 years now. The oldest tree is about 7. I add about 2 trees a year, I guess, to it. This last spring I planted a suckle pear, so that gives me 3 pear trees. My peach tree died, so I'm going to have to do something about that. I got maybe 10 apple trees, different varieties. I enjoy living off the land as much as possible. I get a tremendous amount of pride of sitting down to dinner and saying, everything on this table I grew on the place.